This is Art 490, Baroque art, and this video is on Jan Vermeer. Vermeer is one of the three main artists from the Dutch Golden Age that I talked about before. This is the other two are Rembrandt and Frans Hals. Vermeer we know least about. He didn't make that many paintings, maybe over the course of his career, 50, say, and there's only about 34 that are still in existence. So there's not very many works, but all of them are jewels. Very little is known of his life. He spent almost all of his life in Holland, I mean, most really in the city of Delft, where he's from. And he was famous within that city during his lifetime, among just a very small number of people. He was a member of the Painters Guild. In fact, he was the leader of it for some time, and he was known among those people and those few people who were his patrons. But at the time that he died in poverty because although he lived a sort of an upper middle class life, he was an innkeeper and a art dealer during his lifetime. Right at the time of his death, there was a war and economic downturn caused him to lose all his stuff, and after he died, all of his belongings were sold, and he was virtually forgotten for 200 years, and he wasn't rediscovered until the 1860s, and in which case some art historians discovered him or rediscovered him and were able to distinguish his work from others until they had a body of work to attribute to him. We're going to look at several of his works and see if we can see what it is about them that is special. This work is not the one on your list, but I want to talk about it because it's featured in a movie, and I'm going to talk about that and certain features of his art. They're very consistent. The few works that we have of his, almost all of them are called genre paintings. That is, paintings of everyday life, and it was a common thing among the artists of the Dutch Golden Age. There were people who specialized in just genre paintings, and we'll see a few of those by other artists. But Vermeer has an even more restricted genre within that genre of everyday life paintings. Almost all of them are interiors, and many of them are in this same room that you see here. He sets up a group of objects and a couple of people, sometimes one, sometimes two or three, and sets up a scene and paints it. And they're all very quiet. There's hardly anything going on. When you think of the Baroque occurring outside of his life, with the emotion and emotionalism and movement and the kind of things that you think of Caravaggio and Rubens, none of those characteristics do you see here. These are all very quiet, calm, well-composed pictures. And they're also very realistic, and the term realistic is something we need to look at again. It's not a kind of realism that is like Caravaggio's realism. When you think of Caravaggio, he would set up imagery, objects and things and people, often just ordinary people, and depict them exactly as they looked for the purpose of telling some story, say. Here, and the opposite current, as I was going to say, in Italy, the opposite current was the Carracci current, and that was more idealism. But it's a kind of idealism is like a heroic idealism, like taking things from ancient art and that being your ideal. So, so you have realism and idealism. But think of what it would be like, say, you're at home and you get a call and somebody's going to come over, and somebody you want to impress, and you realize your home is a mess and you have to clean it up, okay? And the way your home looks on an ordinary day, call that realism, what it actually looks like, and that you want to make it when you clean it up for somebody else, or to have a picture made of your room, say. Architectural Digest is going to have a photo shoot in your living room, say. You want it to look ideal. You want to make everything, put everything in place, and make it as perfect as you can. But the ideal that you make of it, you want to be seen or depicted exactly as it is in a realistic way. But if you think about it, realism is the way it was before you cleaned it up. So um, think of those two different ways of looking at what real is. Um, Vermeer's pictures are realistic, but they're also idealistic. And when you think of, well, how can they be both? The individual objects within the picture are ideal looking. I mean, they look perfect, but they look exactly like those real objects do in the real world. Many of them are identifiable objects, like in this one, it's called the music lessons. There's a box back here. This is actually a musical instrument. It's called the virginals, which is a precursor to pianos. It has a keyboard here. And there's a woman standing there playing it. I don't know exactly how it works. I mentioned there's strings and hammers and whatever to make music with it. But it's a real object that you could now look at in a museum, say, and measure it. And this is an extremely accurate representation of it. So it's real. But and as is all the other these chairs, these are identifiable chairs. They still exist. This is a viola. Um, all these objects, these Persian carpets, the paintings, all these are very, um, they have real world objects that exist that he depicted. But the arrangement of them is ideal. And the ideal is not the heroic ideal, say, of the Caraccis, but the kind of ideal where the ideal is to make everything in a perfect balance, to compose it within this rectangle so that everything is in exactly the right place, all of the tones are just right, the light coming in plays over everything in the most harmonious manner, and all of the vertical lines and the horizontal lines and the shapes, one shape played against another, one color against another, everything is in a perfect balance. So that is sort of the essence of what makes a Vermeer. It's just, you just look at them and they're just absolutely gorgeous to look at, because you just look at, there's nothing happening, there's no story, there's no uh, overall deep meaning or anything. It's just the perfection of everything being in the right place. Um, we saw something similar in like in the Venetian artists like um, Titian, and where they're trying to trying to suggest like a poem, like a certain kind of poetry going on, and there's just a few little elements that suggest a story without actually telling a story. The Tempest um, would be an example. Um, those kinds of pictures, are similar to this in that there's, here you see two people. There's a woman. You see her from the back. You also can see her reflection in the mirror right here. And there's a man here, and they're both dressed up very nicely. And there seems to be, I guess he's teaching her how to play the piano, and but we are farther back, sort of looking at them as if they're not aware of our presence. And so there's a kind of a story or tension going on between them. But that, you can imagine a story. But whether there's a story or anything, that may be an extra level of complication to the image. But really the image is just about the visual experience of seeing all of these shapes and colors and formal elements balanced against one another. Another aspect of this that has struck people, I imagine it did at the time, but even more so when he was rediscovered in the 1800s, was that people looked at these and saw that they were kind of like photographs, and people in the past didn't see them as photographs because photography wasn't invented till the early 1800s, and as I said, Vermeer wasn't rediscovered from the time of his death to the time of the 1860s when he was rediscovered. People were aware of what photographs looked like, and they different from other artists of the period, or any period before photography. These look like photography. It looks like the kind of thing that a photographer has set up a studio and composed everything in front of the camera and taken a picture. Yet, this was long before there was anything like a photographic camera to do such a thing. Now, there did exist something called a camera obscura, and Philip Stedman, an art historian, has made an argument that he used a camera obscura, and he was able to demonstrate that there's sufficient evidence within several of his pictures that he did use one. The way he did it was using this painting. If you notice that since these are all real objects, you could go and measure how big one of these things is. So you know exactly where it is in space, how big it is. People know how big these tiles are, apparently, and then they can measure the room. And because that the image in the mirror, you can see the base of an easel here, and you can also see the back. This is the back wall. You can tell how far away the back wall is. So, where we're standing would be right behind us is the back wall of this room. So you can make a plan of this room, and you can mark out where everything is of these actual objects are in the room. Here's Philip Stedman's illustration of that. This is the woman playing, the instrument here, and the man. And the other objects, there's a table with a white pitcher is right here, and the tiles on the floor. And back here, there's a stool and an easel, that's what this is, being reflected in this mirror. So you can see a little bit extended area here of what's in the mirror. And this is the back wall. So, he's made a plan. This is the plan of the room. This is the back wall, where the sort of piano thing is right here. And this is the windows on this. And there's a wall of windows all pouring light into this room. All these lines represent here, this point here, this little circle, these 6 circles represent the points of view from 6 different paintings by Vermeer of this same room, where it's capable, Philip Stedman presumably was able to calculate that this is the point of view from the different paintings that were made in this room that have enough information to work this out. So if you take any one of these, say, and you draw a line here, this represents the amount of the room that can be seen in that particular picture. From another one you would see, a different point of view of the room. And if instead of your eye being there where you're looking, that there's a lens here, and the light coming from this cone of vision, say, is going through there, it makes the reverse cone going out here, and it intersects with the wall. Well, if you look at the intersections with walls of all of these different viewpoints, you have a rectangle on the wall, and that rectangle is exactly the same size as the picture that is seen from this point of view. So using that as his evidence, he's able to infer that some sort of object, some sort of device that has a lens right here and projecting onto a surface at this distance was used to at least help compose the picture in some way. Here's what it would look like if you're looking down at this back corner here. This is where a lens would be, and this is where it projects onto the wall. And this sort of box of space, this would be the dark room. Camera obscura means dark room. It could be just, curtains or something to create a space that's dark with a lens so that gathering the light that's over here, going through the lens and projecting onto the surface. Now, when it comes to this side, it's going to be upside down, and it's going to be reversed left to right. And that means that to get from this view to an actual painting requires some other step, because if you actually had photographic chemicals and you put them right here and you opened up this lens or opened up an aperture allowing light in, you could make a photograph. And this box would actually be a camera the way we use the word camera today. But this is long, of course, long before the advent of photographic chemicals and the ability to do that. So the artist would be acting as the chemicals, as a person who can take whatever information here and make a painting out of it. Now, there was a movie called Tim's Vermeer, where an engineer named Tim was able to solve the problem, or at least propose a way that you could get this image onto a painting in a way that was compatible with the kind of technology that they had at the time. And I have a video that demonstrates how that would look. You have this is a mirror. Let me roll the thing here. There's a mirror on a stick, and the mirror is pitched at 45 degrees. And you can see the reflection in the mirror. And here is a picture of a rose upside down. This would be equivalent to the image that is projected by a camera obscura onto the wall. And here is a painting of that rose made using this device. And as the camera comes up and looks down into the mirror, you see here the reflection of this picture in the mirror, and it's as the camera moves, as mimicking the way an artist looking down on the mirror would move his head. You can see that it maps exactly onto the painting. So if you were going to reproduce that photograph of the rose onto this surface, you could do it by having this mirror here. And if you look at where the edge of the mirror meets the picture, if you were just to put some paint there and you saw that paint was, that there was an edge, you could see the edge of the mirror, that means the paint is not exactly the same color. So if you remixed your colors until you got exactly the right color, and you put it down there so that it was right at the edge, you wouldn't see the edge at all, because it would match. And as you see here, the edge of this mirror has disappeared, because it's exactly matching the tone and the position. Not exactly, but approximately the tone and the position. So if you use such a device, it's just a mirror. It's kind of it's more of a, it's not your typical mirror, because it's, scientific mirrors have the silvering, that part that reflects on this surface rather than the back surface. Normally when you get a mirror, the silver's on the back side. So you're looking through the glass, and the light goes through the glass to the silver on the back, and it reflects out. But if you did that, you would have on this edge, you would see the thickness of the glass. But this kind of mirror has the silver on the surface. So the reflection goes all the way to the edge. And so if being a 45-degree angle and positioned in relation to the wall in such a way that everything lines up, you can actually make a picture that looks, practically, exactly like the original. Whether Vermeer did something like that, we don't know. Well, all we know is that his pictures do have a photographic look to them. The tones seem perfect. In Philip Steadman's argument, one of the things he did was he showed what it would be like if you took like a little square of this tone here, and you put it over here, and you took a square of this tone and put it over here. They would be radically different from one another. This modulation of tone from here to here is a very slow modulation, and you don't hardly notice it. But when you get over here, it's much darker over here than it is over here, and that gradient is something it's difficult to see. It's also difficult to conceive, because when you conceive of the wall, you see the wall as if you painted that wall, you know that the paint that you paint over here is exactly the same color as the paint over here. It only happens to be lighter here because it's closer to the window. But when you look at a scene with your mind's interpreting of things, you know that this wall is the same tone. A lot of optical illusions are based on that, the difference between the way you think of something and the way you are actually perceiving. The tones that make up the white squares here are different tones, even though we interpret them as being the same, because we know that from our experience of floors, that this tone is the same as this tone is the same as this tone. But because there's different light pouring on different parts, they actually look different. But if we read it as if we're looking at a photograph of a room, then we have a different experience than if we look at them as just tones on a surface. And apparently, in order to see them as tones on a surface and to paint them as tones on a surface, it's very, very difficult unless you're doing something with some kind of device that mimics the way a camera works. There are other things, as I'll point out when I see, when we look at other pictures that do something similar. But for now, for contrast, this is a painting by an artist named Peter de Hoek. And he would be a painter contemporary with Vermeer. He's not what we call one of the major leaguers. He's a little bit of a minor artist compared to Vermeer. And Vermeer may have, as an art dealer, may have, taken, been, seen de Hoek's work, and it may even have come into his dealership, I guess, and sold them, and so he was aware of them. But his are different from this. I mean, when you look at this, I don't get the sense that this is like a photograph. It looks like a painting. It's not particularly well composed. This pattern of the floor is a little distracting. It's so much harsh contrast, and it also looks a little not quite right. Like there's some distortion in it, and nothing about about this picture looks as special as a Vermeer. You can look back real quick. Vermeers don't look like that. I mean, everything looks like it's in the right place. It looks very economical. Like there's nothing that you need to take this out, or you need to cover this bit up, or only this part is good, or no. It all looks right. Here's another Vermeer. If you look at this in relationship to another de Hoek, like this is de Hoek. It's same story. A woman holding a balance. That's what that's. She's holding in her hand a little balance. This doesn't look like a photograph, and it doesn't look like it's specially composed or anything compared to the Vermeer, where everything looks, as perfect as it can be in terms of its tone, and everything just feels right about it. Just the amount of light coming in, the delicacy of everything. Let's look at it up close. We have a high resolution image. Here's the balance. Here's one of those features. This little dot of light. If you look at things through lenses and things are not quite in focus, sometimes you get this little effect, this little dot of light, something that you would never see, with the naked eye. But you do see in images through lenses. And if he spent a lot of time looking at projected images to compose his pictures, that is, he would set up a scene, look at the projected image onto the wall, and then call out to can you move a little to the right? Can you move that table just 2 inches to the left? To compose the picture in such a way that everything is right. If he's looking at images like that, this is a thing that you would see if things aren't perfectly in focus. There's these little, lens aberrations or whatever. It doesn't have that super fine, perfect focus that a lot of Dutch artists were able to do. I mean, we've seen images from like still lifes, say, where everything is absolutely in focus and everything is perfectly true to the visual phenomena of the way when you look at metal, reflected metal, or the texture of flowers, or the texture of food, or whatever. Some of those have an even greater degree of realism than this has. Now that we look at this table with high resolution, it actually looks a little out of focus. But it's all part of an effort to balance everything just right. Look at the foreshortening. This is a little, I guess it's a mirror or a painting or something with glass on it or something. But it's on the wall, and you're seeing it radically foreshortened in order to see it from that angle. There's a nail on the wall here where they hang pictures, and I guess this is where a nail had been, and they pulled it out and fixed the plaster. You can see the texture of the canvas. There is some, another meaning to the picture. Like this is not just any woman, but she's a woman holding a balance. And balancers are like a scale that jewelers would use to weigh things. I guess how much does a pearl weigh, or a diamond, or whatever. So it has that, but in the background there's a painting of the Last Judgment, and Judgment is often seen, or justice is seen as a woman holding a balance. The idea of scales to measure things, to compare one thing to another. That's what's going on in the Last Judgment, and she seems to be kind of mimicking what's going on in the Judgment by doing this. But so that there, may be some other layer of meaning besides simply a woman standing here at a window. If there is such an extra meaning to the picture, then that's just extra. I mean, what makes the picture special is something else, because this woman is also holding a balance, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, it is of no value. I mean, the fact that she's holding a balance, and there doesn't seem to be any special meaning behind it, or any special attention to all of the subtleties of tone or anything that Vermeer is using. So when I think of what we often look at these artists and sort of compare them to the category that they're in, like Rembrandt has qualities that come from Caravaggio in terms of his realism, and his tenebrism comes from Caravaggio indirectly, but also aspects that came from Rubens, say, or the Venetian artist, or his own northern artist tradition of a kind of realism, surfaces of things. I mean, that's Rembrandt and his influences. But who influenced Vermeer? I mean, there's nobody else like him. And when you look at pictures that are similar in that they are genre pictures of people in rooms with a bunch of props, you can't get from this to this, as an example of influence, unless it's just the idea of painting a picture of a person in a room is influence. But influence in this case could come from science, because in the Dutch Golden Age, one of the things that was golden about that age, in addition to the art and the economy, was also science. There were a lot of scientists who lived in Holland at this time, and they advanced in many different arenas of science. One of which was optics, and people with lenses and grinding lenses and looking through lenses, telescopes and microscopes. There was an acquaintance of Vermeer's who lived nearby, who was famous for as a lens grinder who did many scientific discoveries using microscopes. So if Vermeer were influenced by anybody for the particular aspect of his pictures that has to do with the optics of it, it was through the scientists at the time. That is, everyone was looking at the world through a kind of a scientific eye, like wanting to discover, wanting to see how the world works, how vision works, how optics work, and if he were part of that, then that would help explain some of what we're talking about in terms of the technique of getting the image onto the surface. But it doesn't explain, that his particular genius of composing things. I mean, it's not a scientist who does the compositional aspect of these things, the balance, the harmony within them. But certainly, if he were friends with a scientist and he were using scientific things to get his image onto the canvas, then some of that is affecting the way he's rendering images, because this kind of rendering with things a little bit out of focus, nobody does that unless they're dealing with lenses. Nobody looks at things out of focus just with the naked eye. Here's another one. The same sort of thing. It's just a woman standing in the same room, apparently, the same windows. Many of these you can recognize by the leaded glass, and the windows are the same from one to another. Sometimes it's a same map, sometimes it's a different map on the wall. Did the other one have a map? The other one had a painting, but we'll see others with the same map on the wall. And when he has a map on the wall, he depicts it exactly as it is. I mean, or at least is within the limit of his resolution that he's painting at. You could compare this to the actual map that still exists and find all of these lines he's copied exactly as they are. Look at the colors reflected in this. I guess this is maybe a brass pitcher. I think this is called Woman with a Pitcher. The colors of the room, the colors of this tablecloth. I guess it's a Persian carpet, reflected in the mirror-like surface here, so that he's really observing the tone and color of everything, and he's composed it. I mean, just look at this balance of rectangles and lines, and giving weight to one tone to another. It's all just exquisite. I would invite you to, when you go to your list of works, click on your image and look at the high resolution. Just look at them for a while and just think about, let the picture work its magic on you, essentially. When we look at, his competitors, or at least his contemporaries, this is de Hook, with many of the same ingredients as a Vermeer. Pictures on the wall. There's even a map on the wall of some sort, and people at a table drinking, wearing costumes. There's a window even in exactly the same place, open with light pouring in. So it has all of the ingredients of a Vermeer. When we look at the Vermeer that is like it, it's a different world entirely. Let's look at this one. This one's one on your list. Just look at the position of this chair in space. How it just sort of kind of accidentally a little bit off. Is not exactly aligned with the picture, as this one is by de Hook. Say the chair is exactly in the lines of the perspective, and is parallel. This edge is parallel to the picture plane, and it looks ordinary. You can see the whole chair. He's just showing you as an example of more stuff. But here, it's composed in the picture. It has just the right amount, and it stops the image from, stop you from seeing where the floor meets the wall. All these other objects and shapes, they're all related to everything else, so that it all creates a balance. This one is called A Woman Reading a Letter, and and it's just as quiet and subtle as it can possibly be. It's you can say the subject is really the light pouring in on objects and how the light affects everything. He used the most expensive paints that he could get, including the blues, lots of blues that are lapis lazuli, the really expensive stuff. Unlike Rembrandt, who used the cheapest paints available. Look at the difference in the warm and the cool. You know how the light coming in from the window is cool light. Like, so it's not directly from the sun, say in the sunset, the warm light from a sunset, but the color of the light coming from the sky. This is a different artist. This is his name is Gabrielle Metsu. So he would be the closest contemporary and the closest in terms of you know the level that Vermeer is at, though you probably never heard of him. But he has many of the same ingredients. Here's an example of a Vermeer, of somebody sitting, like a scientist sitting at a table doing something scientific. Has a globe right there. This one has the globe, has the carpet on the table, a man sitting there. But when I look at this pose of this man and the whole look of the hair and everything, it looks much more idealized. Like it's artificial in a kind of sense where it's trying to look more like the idea of a perfect sort of person sitting at the table, rather than it recording this artfully set up image that Vermeer creates. Here you get the warm light. Here's another one with it's called the circles of confusion. Little tiny bits of light right there, as though we're looking at this through a lens rather than directly through the unaided eye. And here's another one. This was very small. This is only like 9 inches tall. And I had the chance to look at this for a long time when it was at a show in Birmingham. It's just a incredible thing to look at. I mean, look at, for example, the little circles of confusion, like in her mouth. These little tiny little highlights where light is like the wetness in her mouth, or the light is hitting it and creating this little highlight. But it's a circular highlight. Here, look over at the lion's head. This is the top end of the chair, has little lion's head things sticking out, and there's this little where the light turns into little circles. That's a lens artifact. Remember, this is a very, very tiny picture, so we're blowing this up very much. That little highlight there, and even the way the hat has little bits of circular things. This is another subgenre within the genre of everyday life things, where it's just a head. It's just an image. It's not intended to be a portrait of a specific person, though it may be that. It might be somebody from Vermeer's household, like one of his daughters or servant or somebody who dressed him up and made a picture of him. But for the purpose of it being, there was a type of picture that was popular that was just of heads, just of people's faces, in using an expression, wearing a costume or something. That this is one of those examples, rather than the interior with the window kind of example. Here's another one. Something you could make a movie about. Look at this. Look at the edge of her nose. There's no line indicating where the edge of her nose stops and the cheek beyond is. And when you're drawing and you think linearly. That is, you thinking of lines, and you look at the forms of the thing you're drawing. You want to put a line around everything. When we teach drawing, one of the things we try to do when we're trying to move from the linear to a tonal picture is to try to avoid drawing lines. It's very hard to do because you just so want to draw that line. Yet Vermeer here, for whatever reason, maybe because he's interested in the tones and the relationship of one tone to another, has completely not put the line. Here's that map again. He reuses the same prop a lot. There's the chair with the lion's heads here. There's another one back there. This one's on your list, and this has a different flavor from the others because the others have this sort of the world we're looking at is sort of upper class or upper middle class house in Delft, where the people are wearing nicer clothes. Where here we have what looks like the servant in a room that looks more like or at least less like a room for the gentry, but more for the servants' quarters. Maybe it's a kitchen, or maybe it's a downstairs storage room or something. But this is called the Milkmaid, and she's holding a pitcher of milk and pouring it into another bowl of some sort. And there's bread in a basket and a jar, a ceramic jar, and there's cloth draped table. Some little object on the bottom. I think I remember someone saying this was a mousetrap, though it may be something else. I'm not sure. It looks similar to the thing that Joseph was making in the Baroque altarpiece. It has a surface with holes in it, and whatever contraption is going on down there. And there's Delft tiles, these ceramic tiles with little images on them. Very collectible now. There's a brass basket of some kind, some sort of container that's reflecting light just as brass does, and a wicker basket. And there's that nail on the wall again, casting its little shadow, and all the little nail holes that where he's hung pictures and maps, presumably, onto the wall. This one has a different texture to it. Things are a little I don't know, drier, I guess. A different tactile feeling to this picture than the others, and like this bread, the texture of the bread. Look at the little dabs of color that make that texture, and the color within her outfit here, and the contrast that the blue makes, the little dots, color. Speaking of the little dots, let me look at this real quick. Like, look at this string. This is a woman sewing. This is also a very small picture. Look at the string coming out of this box or embroidery thread, I guess. It just looks like dribbles of paint. When I think of this in relationship to that photographic look, this seems a little incompatible with it. But it's it's part of the optical phenomenon, I guess that you have with the way things look through a lens. Maybe it creates that effect. I'm not sure. Back to the Milkmaid. Look how intensely blue that is. And one of the things that's making it intensely blue that is because it's a complement to this color, and everything is all of this tone. This is warm tones and bread textures and golden colors are all to set off this blue to make it as blue as it can be. Then we have this. This is a different sort of thing. This is called the art of painting, and it's It's kind of like it's very similar to all the other pictures, though this being called the art of painting, that like it's the allegory of painting rather than a portrait of a specific artist making a painting. Now Rembrandt did a picture of himself painting, where he's standing at an easel, and he's obviously a painter painting, and is not represent. It's not meant to represent the art of painting. It's just Rembrandt painting. Um, but here, this is, at least ostensibly, is about paintingness. You know, it's about the art, the idea behind painting. And so we have a picture of a painter sitting at an easel with a chair. It's very similar to the chair and the easel that's in uh, this this diagram back here. This is here. So I guess Stedman put this in to represent what is represented in this easel back here, represented in the, or reflected in the mirror. Going back if we can. There. Sorry, there's the white line around it. But this is a high resolution image. Yeah. The artist is painting a picture, and it looks like it has a sort of a neutral ground on it. Using a maul stick, like Rembrandt had a maul stick in one of his pictures. He's painting just as if he were making the finished picture directly onto this canvas. So like this represents the leaves in her hair, like that, the laurel wreaths. And so he's just painting them as this part is finished now, and then when he goes and paints this, it'll be finished. I don't know that that's the process that he actually used. He's certainly not demonstrating a camera obscura here. He seems to put a little bit of a white line or a light line indicating where he's going to paint stuff. Like these lines, I guess, represent the forms here that he's painting. The process of these, I don't know if they know for certain exactly how he did it, but one way of doing it is to paint it as a black and white image and then put color glazes on top, like Jan van Eyck did, or may have done. When you look at the perspective of this floor, it's and the fact that there's no evidence that there's any kind of perspective construction, like there's no lines in the paint, or you know, when you have lines that continue on to a vanishing point, say, and you know, you need more than just a vanishing point to make something like this. This would be really complex to do as a work of geometry to create this. But if you were to use a camera obscura, the technique that is speculated, perhaps you could get this without the trouble of doing the geometry of it. There's the map again. I believe this map is they have this map still. I mean, it still exists, and that it can be compared to this. And as far as I know, it's identical to. You know, he's copied every little detail of the map that you can see here from an original map, which is not in itself evidence that he used some sort of device to do that. But if you were going to make such a thing, if you were using such a device to create this as say a camera obscura, then it isn't any more trouble to copy something exactly as it is than it is to make something up. Okay, two of his pictures that are on your list are non-interiors. This is a seascape or landscape of a cityscape, I guess you call it, of Delft, the city where he's from, and the other one is called the Little Street in Delft. This is just an image of the building opposite to where his studio is. Looking out his window, you would have seen this image. These two I put on your list so that you can compare them to other landscapes that we will see later from the different periods. So you'll have something to compare a Vermeer to in terms of his landscape. But here we see it's almost square. It's not quite. I guess it's a horizontal rectangle. It's almost as tall as it is wide, but it's got a whole lot of sky to it. And what you'll see in many of the Dutch pictures of landscapes is that they like to make the sky big, and that's because they're flat. The countryside is flat, and the sky sort of dominates everything. So when they make pictures, they often put the horizon line down here and give you a lot of sky. Another thing is that the accuracy of this. A lot of these buildings are still there. I think this tower is still there, and this harbor is still there. These things are very accurate. So more evidence that it's he's using some sort of device. When you use a device of whatever kind that he may have used, you can make things exactly as they are. Positionally, everything is in the right place, or at least in the place that it would be in the real world, as if you're making a document of what something looks like. And if you're just looking at it to paint, I mean, you can move things around and change things as much as you want. It's just as easy to do that as it is to make it accurate. But for whatever reason, Vermeer is choosing to make it accurate. We don't have any other Vermeer cityscapes like this to compare to see, that he has a trend to of a certain type of composition. So since we only have one, we don't know how it is. But if you look at this in relationship to his interior scenes, what this has in common is that close attention to light and dark, and to how light falls on things. Apparently, this is a cloudy day, and there's dark clouds up here, and imagine that what's going on is that this part of the city that we're seeing is dark because it happens to be shaded by a cloud, whereas back here in the distance, there's light going, sunlight directly hitting this, making this much lighter than this in the foreground. And that's, that it just being attentive to how the light works and how things look, and the subtleties of light is something that this has in common with his interiors. The little street in Delft is an example of what appears to be a document of the way a building looks. Like he's just looked out the window and made this exactly as it is. And it might be that the reason that he chose this particular section of what he could see out the window to paint is because it has the same sort of balance and perfect harmony of shapes. I mean, look, say this line here that goes from here to here, here to here, here, and along the edge of this building, down here to this corner where this line meets the corner. All that line is just, it's a nice line, but what it has the effect of taking this, which is very far away, and this, which is on the picture plane, bringing that up to the picture plane so that it doesn't look so far away. So you see this in relationship to this as a form rather than as something that's far away. Same with these other things, lining up with this. And this apparently lines up with points at the corner. Lots of subtle balances of one thing to another, one rectangle against another, one horizontal line with a vertical line, balances and harmonies that are going on in this that are just, wonderful painting. I think one art historian said this was the best easel painting in the world, and I don't disagree with that. Look at this little vignette right here. This little bit here actually looks more like as if it were a painting on the wall rather than the illusion of an alleyway going back into space. And that's just neat to me. That it's he's not trying to give you a strong illusion of the depth. He wants you to see all of these shapes and colors in relationship to one another. You know, he puts this bright blue back here in the red. You know, that advances. It comes to the surface, so that it looks like it's on the surface rather than farther away. So you see that in relationship to this color, and this in relationship to these colors here. I mean, that's it's just gorgeous. I mean, if we look close, let's see, we can look close. You can see all the bricks. You know, you're not breaking. You're not, you know, taking a ruler and drawing hard lines to create the bricks. It's just a. It's almost like an impressionist painting of bricks when you get up close. Very nice stuff. And when you look at this in relationship to his contemporary De Hook, who did a similar picture, well, it's a different world entirely. Um, you know, this has many of the same ingredients, even with a you know, a doorway looking back into space with a figure back there. But none of this, it doesn't look composed, is what I'm saying, I guess, is that it doesn't feel like one unified picture. In fact, the right half looks like it's a different picture from the left half. And there's nothing special about the relationship of horizontals and verticals, and, you know, look how the brick is painted. You know, this does look, you know, like, you know, he just took a ruler and made it, and compared to this. So I hope that, you know, gives you a sense of it. But I would expect you would get a better sense if you look at these images and just look at them a long time, look at them up close with this with a high resolution, and just stare at them for a long time. Ideally, if you ever get a chance to go to a museum and see one, then they're well worth your time. Okay, so that's Vermeer.